started. I know this is super early, but it's better to be running early than running late. Running late is incredibly stressful. So we have a pre-recorded presentation coming up from Florian Beijers, Hacking Blind on hacking with a Screenreader. And honestly, I know absolutely nothing about making computers accessible for blind people. So I am going to pay close attention to Florian's presentation, and I'm going to be learning with the rest of you folks. I think it's real. I mean, I already knew about Screenreaders. Screenreaders make the web and other internet services accessible for blind people, which is one of the reasons, for instance, why we should be creating alt text whenever we post an image into something. I try to use alt text on Twitter as much as possible. I try to use alt text on Hack the Box's blog because, you know, I'm kind of in charge of Hack the Box's blog. And for as long as I'm in charge of Hack the Box's blog, I use alt text in our images. So, but other aspects of making computer technology accessible to blind people, honestly, I'm not too knowledgeable about that. So, Chloe, you're ready to hit the play button on Florian's presentation. Hacking Blind, excellent. So I'm going to fade out here, and then after Florian's presentation, I will give all of you a closing talk. Thank you very much, folks.
What you're hearing right now is a Screenreader. A Screenreader is a tool that can essentially read you the screen. That's what it does. It only parses text content. It doesn't parse images, not properly at least. It will depend on some kind of image description in order to know what's on the image. We'll get to that in a moment when I when I happen to get to that. This is the other Screenreader. This is eSpeak. This is Speak Up on the Kali Linux site that we're currently looking at. This is the Kali Linux rolling release text console that I have open in a virtual machine currently. And what we're seeing is essentially just an empty console right now. I'm going to do some small showings in a little bit here, but let me first tell you who I am. My name is Florian Beijers. I am from the Netherlands,
Chloe,
and
are you ready to
have pretty much always been interested in computers. It's been an interesting journey so far. It's been fun mostly because I just started as a programmer. I started programming when I was 10. I would do some HTML, I would do some Python, I'd do some C#, and then there was always fictionally this thing that I was fascinated by called computer hackers, even back then. I read The Cuckoo's Eggs by Clifford Stoll, and I read Little Brother by Cory Doctorow. All these stories as I went through my, I guess, formative years, and computer hacking seemed to be this interesting thing that people were doing, and technically it should be accessible because it's mostly command lines, but then I heard from people that it really wasn't all that accessible. You couldn't really do very much, and there was other stuff going on, and it was just like a lot of data you had to sift through really quickly, and Screenreaders wouldn't be good at that. So that always sort of kept me back. It was a bit of a gatekeep, as it were. I always sort of had the idea that it wasn't doable. You couldn't be a blind computer hacker. For context, I am fully blind. I don't actually have any sight apart from light perception, which is very much useless in an engagement, I would say. But at some point, towards the end of 2020, that idea of it not being accessible purely because of the fact that I was blind became somewhat offensive. Security should be a thing that anyone can do.
I see what you did there. ZDRSIX Chinese symbol KLI dollar.
A+ for joke, F for delivery. All right, let's move on. Live recordings, gotta love them. So anyway, what's funny about this whole thing is that I landed with the right people at the right moment. I managed to get myself into Try Hack Me, and I decided, you know what, let's just try it. Let's see how far I can get with this. Let's see if I'm able to properly do this whole hacking things, cybersecurity, infosec, all these terms that I'd always heard, and I wanted to be a part of it. So that's what I started doing. And as you can tell from that, I started doing this whole thing about a couple of months ago. So I'm by no means a professional super hexer of any sort. Maybe I will be at some point, but I'm not yet. And mostly when this CFP came in for the call for presentations for this InfoSec conference, what I wanted to do was essentially two things. I wanted to essentially emit a clarion call saying, hey, we are here and we'd like to participate. And on the other hand, I'd like to put people who were in my position and thought this just wasn't possible into essentially a fast track, know what not to try, know what to try. And by doing the second, I'm kind of hoping to do the first. So if I point out a potential pain point, I'm hoping that awareness will be created for that pain point to not exist anymore or not happen again. And there is a few really interesting pain points where I can actually show that off or tell you about it. So, and essentially, when you want to start with cybersecurity, a lot of it is, you need to find the right resources. That's not a thing that just plagues blind people. That's a thing that plagues everybody. Everybody needs to know what to use from the abundance of guides and tutorials and all sorts of other things that are out there. And there's a lot of videos and there's a lot of books and all sorts of other things, boot camps, you name it. And finding your way through all the clutter can be tricky. When you want it to be accessible, even more so. Because particularly video courses are very hit and miss where that's concerned. Video tutorial creators like to use demonstratives a lot. So you'll be watching a course and someone will go, well, if I click here and do this, then that will happen. And then we just paste this here. And now you can see that it works. And you've completely lost your Screenreader viewer because they have no idea what you just did. Another fun one is, let me just type this command here. And we have no idea what was typed. Audio description, I didn't actually type anything. There's nothing on the screen. So that is a problem, and that makes people wary of the field. People think, like me, that it's just not doable. It's not worth investing time and energy and money into. And I didn't like that. I wanted to see if I could do anything to make that easier. And essentially that's what I've been doing ever since. What I've found is that, a lot of the time you are the problem. You're essentially pointing out that the interface that seemed to work for everybody now suddenly isn't good enough. And people don't like it when you tell them that. People don't like it when you tell them that the interface that they've already toiled on is just not working for a particular group. And that can essentially come out in various different ways. Essentially, what I'm saying very gently when I make up a request to say, look, I can't use your application. The underlying message is I'm currently being discriminated against because this application is not accessible. And obviously, usually that's not intended. It's not, people don't deliberately make their stuff inaccessible. People just don't know. And that's a big issue, not just in cybersecurity land, as it were, but also in web and in just software development in general. People don't get educated on accessibility at all. So more often than not, people either didn't know and want to help, but don't know how, or just were never taught that this was even a thing. And now suddenly there's this person who says that their stuff doesn't work. It's weird. And I get that. That's why I'm doing these kinds of presentations, these kinds of learnings to give people a bit of a starting point to see why sort of digging into this and educating yourself on these kinds of things is important. A really cool example I can give for that is the Kali Linux OS itself, because for a long time it had this bug where if you were to use the speech-assisted install, which it does have, in order to essentially independently install your operating system, it would not let you actually use the Screenreader once it was installed. There was no Screenreader that was installed when you used the speech-assisted install. And that's an easy mistake to make. I guess nobody just tested this, or no one was aware that this was even broken. But it is a serious issue, because at that point, you've installed your OS and you can't use it. You need to actually figure out some bamboozle way to get your Screenreader that you thought you already had installed on a machine that you can't currently use. And it's certainly possible. The way I did it was I had it in a virtual machine, so I could use a technique called optical character recognition, which essentially snaps a picture of the screen, and then you can sort of, by what you know of your computer, you can tell where you are and what commands you're typing. It's very laborious and very slow. But yeah, I managed to get Kali Linux installed. I managed to get it working, and I managed to get it talking. And the second issue that I often see, which I unfortunately didn't really run into, but others might, is that the volume, at least on VM copies, but also I've seen this on bare metal, is at 0 by default for some reason. It's a thing that Kali Linux or Pulse Audio or something does. And what that means is that even if you have a Screenreader running,
reading Punk 4,
you will not be able to actually hear what it says, which is hilarious, because then you get this sort of Matryoshka puzzle where you do the one thing and you think it's working, and then it's not yet because this other thing is also broken. And it's an extremely hostile experience for people who just maybe aren't super tech savvy, don't have the patience or the time or the know how to fix these things, and they'll just throw down the keyboard and walk off to just decide that it's not worth doing. And we can't really blame them. Fortunately, that was fixed this year. I know I saw this in a recent Kali Linux release notes update. I think it was for 21.1, where it says that that's apparently now fixed. I haven't tested this, but I'll take their word for it for now. But yeah, this highlights one of the issues that is a bit rampant in getting this to sort of flow properly, and that is that a Screenreader is only aware of its own OS. You can't, it can't interpret streams of say bitmaps or just images or video from another machine. You can't just VNC into another machine and have it work. That's just not how Screenreaders work. They only know how to deal with text content, and text content that's coming from their own APIs, from their own operating system. They don't have access to the either remote machine or virtual machine. So the remote machine, if you want to use it effectively, needs to have a Screenreader as well. And obviously that's almost never going to happen. So there's a couple of ways around that. You could literally, a la reverse shell, download a portable copy of a Screenreader that has a remote access thing enabled to the target machine. Obviously very sneaky and very stealthy, because the computer will literally start talking to the person. But that's one way of doing it. I didn't try it at the time. What I did was, for example, for the Eternal Blue exploit that TryHackMe has you do, and I wrote a write-up about this on my blog at Florian Beijers.xyz. What I did was I OCR'd the screen all throughout, typing the somewhat laboriously tricky command to wget a shell from my attack machine, so I could shell in and do it from there. At that point, I had access to my actual attack box, which was running a Screenreader. So in that sense, I could make it work. But it was not nice. It wasn't a very pleasant experience, which I have since found some better ways for. There's an NVDA add-on called Lion, which essentially automatically OCRs the screen every so many seconds and gives you the delta on what text has changed, which is quite useful for this kind of thing. Another place where that's useful is when I've done this to fix a bare metal Kali Linux machine, where you use a capture card from HDMI to USB-C in order to stream the screen of the other computer to your OCR-capable Windows machine. And that was a whole bunch of technobabble for people who don't really care about how to do certain things. But like I said, I want to highlight just how laborious the workarounds sometimes have to be in order to get us off the ground and spinning our wheels. And by creating that awareness, I'm hoping that people will think a little bit more before they release something and make sure that it works better. I found that actually once I point out these things, particularly the open source tools, people are usually very good at following up. I actually did a pull request myself to ZTech proxy to fix some of the things that were in the what do they call it? The HUD that they use, the HUD that you can use to from a browser control some of the basic functions of the ZTech proxy. And the reason I even reached out to ZTech proxy is because Burp Suite is completely inaccessible. You can't use Burp Suite at all. It's you can read some of it, and you can certainly tab around and click things, but it's very laborious and it's not productive. You cannot use this on a proper engagement, which is a shame because it's an because it's an industry standard tool. A lot of people use this tool, and same goes for Immunity Debugger, which is not accessible either, unfortunately. Even its remote debugger is completely useless because it'll do the things on the remote GUI, but it will not actually give you any results of what the operation did. I haven't really found the proper way to fix that yet for buffer overflow attacks. WinDebug works, kind of, but obviously that's a little bit more involved than just having immunity with Mona working. So that's one way you could do it if someone who's watching this would like to try buffer overflow attacks. You'll want to use WinDebug. That's the only tool I found so far that works well. And yeah, these are things that are just like really raise the threshold for people to even come into the field. This is what people get fired over. If an industry standard tool isn't accessible for whatever reason, then you can't use the tool, and that means that you can't do what your colleagues are doing, which means your boss might not be very happy with you. Neither will your colleagues. I am a developer by trade. That's what I've been doing for the last 6 years, and even there, this comes up all the time. Unfortunately, it's not something you can really dodge around. Let people use their own tools is definitely something that I would recommend for anyone who's willing to hire people with a Screenreader, because that is so important for people to actually get off the ground. Like, even if they have to use, say, Windows in a virtual machine for some of the tools, or the other way around, maybe Kali is in a virtual machine and Windows is also on the virtual network, that will probably give them a much better experience, because currently Screenreaders on Windows are quite a bit more mature than the ones on Linux, which is a shame, but certainly true. So complex UIs, like I said, ZTech proxy will just work better on Windows. It's just the ugly truth of it. So that means, given Windows is sufficiently hardened, a blind pen tester should be allowed to use both their Windows as well as their Kali machine to do their best work. And that's not negotiable. That's necessary. Because if that's not allowed, then this person cannot do their job. And yes, I realize that's tricky, but it's also something we can't currently change. Unless, a whole bunch of people start contributing to the accessibility of these tools on Linux, the Screenreader on Linux, and all these other things, that's not going to change anytime soon. And bringing your own tools remains extremely important until this day because of that reason. That is most of what I had for you today. I would like to end off with a couple of demos of what happens when you don't do this right. This is where the Screenreader comes in. So what's funny is that you can actually test this out pretty quickly, and unfortunately this one's fixable, but even in command line windows, where people think, blind people use the command line because it's all text-based. That's true. But that also means that things like that things of various natures can happen that are very spammy. Unfortunately, one other industry standard tool, Metasploit, suffers from this. I'm going to type MSF console. And let's just hear what it does when we run that tool.
Starting the Metasploit framework console / starting the Metasploit framework console, starting the Metasploit framework console, starting the Metasploit framework console, starting the Metasploit framework console / starting the Metasploit framework console, starting the Metasploit framework console, starting the Metasploit.
I know it yet. Figured. And unfortunately, fortunately, you can turn this off in Metasploit, but there are command line tools that are extremely spammy. They'll have a banner, or they'll have like symbols or ASCII art to align things, which the Screenreader cannot skip over. We have to hear the entire line again and again and again. We can't just read half of the rightmost half of the line. If this is there, it's going to be there every single line. And if there's no way to turn that off, obviously you can try to grab it out if it's just like a one-time command. But if it's an interactive command line tool, think a Joplin, for example, where you just have to use keys and keystrokes within the actual program, then you can't grab it out. This is going to get in your way. And on Windows, at least, this is a problem. You can't use Joplin on Windows effectively because in the terminal app, it's going to just throw a whole bunch of what it calls symbols at you. It'll just say symbol, 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 which obviously just slows you down terribly and just is not very effective. And this is where I would like to end off and give a plea to people who do make these kinds of tools. Make sure that just give it one run through with your Screenreader. You can get it for free from pretty much any package manager if you have GNOME installed. And just try it. See what it does. See if it reads at all aggravatingly. And if it does, see if you can like add an option to make that less of a problem. And for big GUI makers, I'm like Burp Suite, Community, things like that, Portswigger, I say we're in 2021. Do better. That's literally all I have to say.
We are anonymous. We are Legion. We're coming.
Thanks, everybody.